My husband walked out on me after I tried to warn his brother that his wife was cheating, accusing me of stirring drama and ruining a happy marriage. But 3 years later, karma finally caught up to them, and I watched as his entire life crumbled before his eyes. Prepare for an extensive recounting of events. I, a 37-year-old woman, exchanged vows with my former spouse, Liam, 42, a decade prior. Our union, by most measures, was a contented one, despite certain challenges I encountered with his relatives. These issues, however, were never insurmountable or impossible to overlook, ensuring our relationship remained stable. His family maintained an exceptionally tight-knit connection. His older sister, Emily, now 46, was wed to my former brother-in-law, Jonathan, 48. Emily and Jonathan were parents to 2 children, and Emily dedicated herself to homemaking. Liam adored these children. They were truly the light of his life, and I too held a great fondness for them. In the dynamic between Liam and myself, I consistently played the role of the more engaging aunt, making everything quite agreeable. Approximately 5 years prior, Liam and I encountered a period of financial difficulty. At that time, I elected to step away from my employment to prioritize my mental well-being. My previous work environment was profoundly unhealthy, characterized by an absence of clear boundaries and erratic schedules. I was expected to be constantly available, and the leadership offered minimal, if any, support. Experiencing significant mental distress, I made the choice to pause my career. I discussed this thoroughly with Liam, and he was the one who encouraged this path, offering his full endorsement of my decision. Our individual finances had always been managed separately for personal expenditures. However, for shared costs such as groceries, household items, and leisure activities, essentially all joint endeavors, we maintained a collective account. This shared fund was maintained proportionally to our respective earnings. Consequently, as his income surpassed mine, his monetary input into the joint account was numerically greater, despite our percentage contributions being identical. I had meticulously reviewed my financial standing and concluded that I possessed sufficient reserves to comfortably afford this sabbatical. I had neither requested nor hinted that Liam should assume my portion of expenses. In fact, he was the one who initially put forth that suggestion, which I promptly declined. I preferred not to alter our established financial arrangement, confident that my savings would adequately cover my contributions until I rejoined the professional arena. Liam, too, held a lucrative position at a global corporation, indicating that the financial predicaments we ultimately faced were entirely avoidable. Within 3 months of my career pause, Liam's conduct began to shift inexplicably. He would react sharply if I suggested ordering food or if I acquired something new. Though some of my expenditures came from our shared account, none were for my individual needs. On days I preferred not to cook and proposed dining out, he would offer flimsy excuses or become overtly unkind. After several attempts, I ceased pressing the issue. Yet, even when I utilized my own personal savings, over which he had no authority, his demeanor would turn peculiar. This was entirely uncharacteristic of him. Throughout our entire marriage, I had never witnessed him attempting to dictate or comment on my spending habits. Consequently, I confronted him, inquiring about the root of his behavior. Initially, he attempted to dismiss my concerns, but eventually confessed that he had squandered nearly all of our pooled savings through gambling, leaving us with virtually nothing. He had managed our finances, and I had similarly entrusted him with my own funds. I had neglected to monitor my accounts, confident in his management, as such an incident had never occurred previously. This is precisely why my initial reaction was to assume he was jesting, but the gravity in his expression brought me to a profound state of shock. My immediate impulse was to sever ties, given that he had jeopardized my accumulated life savings, and my sabbatical was intended for my personal benefit. Now an overwhelming obligation to restore our financial stability loomed large. Upon reviewing our accounts, the situation proved far more dire than he had disclosed. We were, quite literally, insolvent and our residence faced imminent repossession. I began an urgent search for new employment opportunities and enrolled him in therapy. Fortunately, within 3 days, I secured a job offer with exceptional benefits, which assured me I could gradually extricate us from this predicament and rebuild our assets. While I remained deeply upset by his betrayal of my trust, the sheer volume of tasks and ongoing events left me no leisure for lingering resentment. During this difficult period, I persistently urged him to seek assistance from Jonathan, who possessed considerable wealth, but Liam consistently refused. I was bewildered by his inexplicable reluctance, yet I resolved not to jeopardize our well-being simply because he found it difficult to approach his own brother-in-law. Ultimately, I contacted Jonathan myself, elucidating our predicament, and he promptly extended his support. Instead of expressing gratitude, Liam initiated an argument, claiming I had undermined his masculine authority as the head of the family in front of his brother-in-law. Even at such a pivotal juncture in our lives, when we were essentially starting anew, his primary concern was his misguided pride and the image he projected to others. This marked my breaking point. My anger towards him was immense. He had, by his solitary actions, not only squandered his own accomplishments but also mine, completely derailing the aspirations we held for our family. I informed him that his failure to demonstrate responsibility towards our family and our future, particularly given our plans to conceive a child, had already stripped him of his own dignity. I articulated that his poor choices had systematically dismantled everything we had painstakingly built, and I drew a firm boundary. I would not consider having a baby unless he reformed his conduct. He became incensed, accusing me of being a domineering spouse, rather than acknowledging my efforts in extricating us from this quagmire, a feat not accomplished without Jonathan's invaluable assistance. Over the subsequent 18 months, we gradually rebuilt our financial standing and meticulously repaid every cent to Jonathan. I will forever be indebted to him for his steadfast support, and for rescuing us from a crisis that was not his doing. Liam, conversely, remained resentful that I had accepted Jonathan's aid, as he wished to conceal our dire circumstances from the rest of the family. Fortunately, Jonathan maintained complete discretion, not disclosing our situation even to Emily. Our relationship had been strained since then, but I held on to the hope that it would eventually improve. Nevertheless, an subsequent incident transpired that irrevocably eroded my personal esteem for him. Once we had regained our stability, the situation somewhat improved. However, during various family gatherings, I began to perceive a palpable tension between Emily and Jonathan. While I recognized it was not my direct concern, I felt a deep unease, particularly for Jonathan. I voiced my observations to Liam, inquiring if this strain was merely my perception or if he, too, had noticed a shift. He dismissed my concerns, suggesting I was overthinking and that nothing was amiss. Yet, 2 days later, when I visited Emily's home to drop off some tarts for the children, who adore my baking, her demeanor was exceptionally peculiar. She appeared rushed and eager for my swift departure. Sensing something was amiss, I departed her residence but remained in my vehicle, intending to observe her movements. Label it intrusive or otherwise, but my instinct strongly suggested a significant event was unfolding, one that required my involvement. To my astonishment, I witnessed a man emerge from the house, whom Emily was escorting. I would not have immediately suspected her disloyalty had her conduct been less indicative of guilt. The man wore a cap pulled low and maintained a slouched posture, clearly attempting to conceal his identity. Interpreting their nonverbal cues, I instantly recognized that she was engaged in an affair with Jonathan. Her brazenness and ingratitude left me utterly appalled and repulsed. A part of me yearned to confront her then and there, but I was apprehensive of her response and uncertain of the appropriate course of action. I decided to return home immediately and recounted my observations to Liam. I anticipated reactions ranging from astonishment, fury, or revulsion, or perhaps even outright disbelief, but I could never have foreseen his subsequent remarks. Liam's reaction was precisely the opposite of my expectations. He paused for a few moments, then asked if I had shared this information with anyone else. Upon my negative response, he exhaled in obvious relief. He insisted that I maintain absolute secrecy and never disclose what I had witnessed. To describe my state as merely shocked would be an inadequate expression. I retorted that he must be utterly deluded if he believed I would remain silent and permit Jonathan to endure a marriage with an unfaithful spouse. He countered that we lacked definitive proof of infidelity, suggesting the possibility of an open marriage. I reminded him that we both knew Jonathan intimately enough to be certain he would never consent to such an arrangement. Nevertheless, I argued that even if such an agreement existed, we still needed to confirm Emily's fidelity, which necessitated a direct conversation with him. I was resolute that we would speak with Jonathan first, and only then approach Emily, convinced that she would fabricate a narrative to protect herself if confronted beforehand. He continued to resist, inventing various novel justifications for why we should refrain from informing Jonathan. He asserted that I had no business meddling in someone else's private affairs, and that neither of us possessed sufficient insight into their relationship to comment. Truthfully, I found myself wavering on a couple of occasions, even considering speaking to Emily first. My logical faculties affirmed the impropriety of the situation, and the necessity of intervening to assist the man who had previously aided my family. Yet my emotional side, which Liam was adeptly exploiting, gravitated towards accepting his preposterous rationalizations for his sister's actions. This profound internal conflict persisted for an extended period, until I ultimately determined that I could no longer tolerate the situation, and had to act ethically, regardless of the repercussions. Before disclosing anything to Jonathan, I felt it necessary to inform Liam of my intention to reveal the truth. To describe his reaction as sheer madness would be an understatement. We engaged in the most intense argument of our entire relationship that day, and he was utterly unwilling to heed my words. This confrontation surpassed even the disputes we had during his gambling ordeal. He repeatedly asserted that I had no right to meddle in his sister's life and destroy it. I countered that his position on infidelity and his vehement defense of Emily were deeply unsettling, prompting me to question how he would react if I were to be unfaithful. He claimed he would prefer not to have a third party inform him about his own wife's actions, but I found his argument unconvincing. A persistent unease began to settle within me. Perhaps, just perhaps, his vigorous protection of Emily's disloyalty was a subconscious attempt to rationalize his own clandestine behavior. My suspicion that he was also engaged in an affair stemmed solely from his alarming response. I possessed no concrete evidence or other justification for even a hint of doubt, yet the possibility was now firmly rooted in my mind. I then drove to Jonathan's residence, hoping for a direct confrontation with Emily present, but she was unfortunately absent. I recounted the entire situation to him, and he wept openly before me. He admitted to harboring suspicions about her infidelity, but lacked tangible proof or grounds to accuse her based purely on intuition. I clarified that my evidence was similarly insubstantial. I had merely observed her in a highly agitated state, and shortly thereafter, a man had exited their house. I conceded that, logically, the individual could have been a tradesperson, a friend, or anyone else, but my gut feeling suggested something entirely different. He expressed his gratitude for my honesty, and with that, our conversation concluded. For the subsequent weeks, no further developments emerged. Liam and I were engaged in a silent standoff, and I surmised he had not informed Emily that I was aware of the affair, nor had he disclosed my intervention to Jonathan. Nevertheless, one day Jonathan delivered a bombshell. He and Emily were pursuing a divorce. This news stunned my former mother-in-law and father-in-law, as no one had foreseen such an outcome. They had consistently been perceived as a deeply affectionate couple leading an idyllic life, at least in the public eye. This is why the announcement caught everyone off guard, save for myself, of course. Emily appeared sullen and tear-stricken, while Jonathan maintained his composure and refrained from disclosing the specific reasons for his decision to end their marriage, simply stating that reconciliation was no longer possible. A few days later, Emily arrived at my home, shrieking at the top of her voice. It was then I understood that Liam had indeed informed her of my disclosure to Jonathan. She hurled invectives at me and uttered statements too vile to repeat, even in confidence. I remained composed throughout, asserting that she was solely responsible for her predicament and that blaming me would not alter the situation. She had made the choice to be unfaithful, and therefore, she was bound to face the repercussions of her deeds. Liam and I had by this point completely ceased communication. Coexisting in the same residence with him imposed an emotional burden I endured daily. Gradually, Emily and Liam began to manipulate other family members against me. Emily prevented her children from interacting with me, while Liam falsely told his mother that I had fed Jonathan untruths about poor Emily, leading to their separation. I was cast as the antagonist overnight, and everyone became so preoccupied with ostracizing me that they failed to recognize the true source of the problem. Eventually, my patience wore thin and I erupted. Our difficulties, stemming from Liam's gambling revelation, combined with the unfolding turmoil, solidified my resolve to end our marriage. I realized that nothing he could do would ever restore my respect for him. I simply could not envision a future alongside a gambler who also championed infidelity. His conduct increasingly hinted at guilt, and frankly, a subtle apprehension that he might be unfaithful to me as well had begun to surface. However, by that point, I had emotionally disengaged from the marriage, rendering any potential affair largely inconsequential to me. This only reinforced my decision to seek a divorce. I convened a family meeting and openly disclosed the true catalyst behind Emily and Jonathan's impending divorce. I recounted witnessing her with an unfamiliar man and how I had confided in Liam, who subsequently defended his sister with unwavering conviction. My attempts to reason with him proved futile, and once I had informed Jonathan of the affair, the siblings began to publicly disparage me. I also articulated that their treatment throughout this entire ordeal had been abhorrent, and I would no longer tolerate such behavior. To my astonishment, even my former mother-in-law and father-in-law began to champion their own children. It was then, unequivocally, that I grasped the utter dysfunction within this family and confirmed the absolute correctness of my decision to withdraw from their poisonous influence for my psychological well-being. When I publicly declared my intention to pursue a divorce as well, a profound silence enveloped the room. Liam appeared utterly stunned, as if struck by a sudden revelation, his eyes wide with disbelief. The immense gratification I experienced witnessing his reaction is indescribable. I further informed him that, given his family's tight-knit nature, he was to vacate my residence within 2 weeks, as I was fully committed to proceeding with the dissolution of our marriage. His demeanor shifted dramatically, and he began to profusely apologize, asserting that we could navigate through this. Candidly, we probably could have, but I harbored no desire to. He attempted to adopt a new attitude, arranging romantic evenings and scheduling spa treatments, as if my discontent stemmed from a deficit of affection. He simply failed to grasp the profound seriousness of our predicament. I had to sit him down and unequivocally state that I was departing because I no longer respected the man he had become. This was not an aspect he could alter within me, and my decision to leave was irrevocable. He struggled to accept this reality, but ultimately he had no alternative. He eventually vacated the house, and our divorce was expeditiously finalized, coinciding closely with Jonathan and Emily's separation. Within a few months, I sold my property and relocated to a different state for a more advantageous career prospect. I made this transition to my current location and employment 3 years ago. Since then, I have maintained no contact with any member of his family. Jonathan and I do engage in occasional conversations, though nothing beyond that. 2 days ago, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. It was Liam. He was weeping uncontrollably, claiming that allowing me to leave was the gravest error of his existence, and that he should have fought more vigorously to retain me, trusting my instincts unequivocally. Unreceptive to his expressions of remorse, I simply inquired about the purpose of his call. Apparently, he had recently married Emily's friend and was content, but within the last week, both Emily and his new wife had vanished. Initially, he feared something catastrophic had befallen them and contacted the authorities. However, the police later informed him that both individuals were safe and had specifically requested no further contact from him. Essentially, his new wife and sister had emptied his bank account and absconded together. For his sake, I sincerely hope this is merely a vacation and they will return, because if it is anything more permanent, he is unequivocally ruined. He was wailing into the phone like a small child, and I felt a strong urge to laugh in his face rather than offer solace. Call me unkind, but it is the truth. He brought this upon himself, and now he must contend with the predicament he created. I conveyed my sympathy for his situation but expressed my genuine confusion as to why he was involving me in his personal turmoil. A silence followed, confirming I had delivered the precise barb I intended. He then articulated a desire for my assistance in tracing their whereabouts, and also sought my advice on financial recovery, given my previous success in extricating him from ruin. I sharply refused, stating I would offer no aid. I clarified that I desired no further association with him, and any challenges he encountered were solely his concern. With that, I terminated the call. It pains me to confess, but I am gratified that he is at last experiencing the repercussions of having devastated my life. I am content with our divorce and harbor no wish for reconciliation, but his insistence on my tireless efforts to restore our finances, followed by the unveiling of his true character and his stance on infidelity, inflicted the deepest wound. Had I known the type of individual he truly was, I would have dissolved the marriage the moment he admitted to gambling. Instead, I toiled, and I did it all for him, only for it to amount to nothing. This is what provoked my profoundest indignation, and I am pleased that his actions and ingrained behaviors are finally catching up to him, and that Emily, of all people, was the one to betray him. A minor development has occurred. I indulged in some investigation, simply because the information was current and accessible. I discovered that Emily and Liam's wife, who is merely 21 years of age, have arranged a European excursion and are spending money extravagantly. Their frequent social media updates raise my suspicions, as this information is public and thus readily obtainable. They have shared posts on platforms like Instagram, but I suspect they have blocked all family members, leaving them unaware of these recent activities. I am conflicted as to whether I should inform Liam of my findings. A part of me believes I should simply provide him with this intelligence. Conversely, another part warns that if I assist him, he will become incessantly reliant, continually soliciting further favors. Furthermore, if I was able to ascertain their location, he is equally capable of doing so, provided he exercises some intellect instead of lamenting like an infant. He sent me another melodramatic message, asserting that I must intervene or he would reach the nadir of his existence. I find myself unable to tolerate this recurring absurdity, and am contemplating capitulation, though my decision remains uncertain. Some time has passed since my last update, and a new crisis has emerged. I did eventually share what I had discovered with him, and he expressed gratitude, immediately proceeding to request additional favors. However, I unequivocally informed him that this was my limit, and I would no longer entertain any further pleas or even calls from him. He sounded displeased by my stance, but he refrained from arguing. I assumed that would be the end of our interactions as he ceased calling. 2 nights ago, however, my former mother-in-law contacted me in the dead of night, her voice frantic, explaining they had encountered legal difficulties and required my professional assistance. As a lawyer, I listened as she explained that Liam's new wife, Samantha, had actually eloped with him, and her parents were now threatening to file charges of abduction against Liam. I jolted upright from my bed, as if shocked. Liam had absconded with a 21-year-old, which, despite her being of legal age, constituted emotional manipulation. I was consumed by a feeling of defilement and revulsion. I could scarcely believe I had been married to such a predatory individual. I informed my former mother-in-law that if Samantha had left of her own free will, the allegations would be baseless, and her parents would have no legal recourse. It was at this juncture that my former mother-in-law began to weep, revealing that Samantha was now corroborating her parents' claims. She was also asserting that Liam had been involved with her when she was a minor and had groomed her. Therefore, she would not testify in Liam's favor. This revelation utterly astounded me. I performed the mental calculations and understood precisely why he had so fiercely defended his sister's infidelity. He too had been unfaithful to me and simultaneously groomed a minor. I declared to my former mother-in-law that they all deserved an infernal fate for having trifled with a young girl's life and emotions. She implored me to represent Liam, claiming they were all regretful, but I retorted that I would enthusiastically litigate against him if the case proceeded, but never on his behalf. I also pointed out her audacity in approaching me, fully aware that her beloved son had cheated on me with a minor, leveraged my efforts to rebuild his life, and was now confronting the ramifications of his actions. She cursed me briefly before ending the call. I have endured sleepless nights ever since. It is unfathomable that he would prove to be a predator. There were no discernible indicators, or perhaps I simply overlooked them, but the very thought of my past association with someone as abhorrent as my former husband makes me feel nauseous to my core. He merits imprisonment for the remainder of his life and beyond. I feel profound pity for the unfortunate girl. I cannot even condemn her. Even if this began when she was 17, that would have been 4 years prior, making Liam 38 at the time. He was involved with a school-age child, someone 21 years his junior, and eventually married her. I remain unaware of how this girl was Emily's friend, and if Emily herself facilitated their introduction, the situation becomes even more unsettling, implying that the entire family poses a danger. I am immensely grateful to have extricated myself and my future from their influence just in time. Thankfully, I have received no direct communications from anyone in my former husband's family. My former mother-in-law has maintained silence, as has Liam. Jonathan, however, did speak with me, and from him I gleaned several details. Apparently, Emily and Samantha returned home within a few weeks, and it was then that Samantha's narrative began to shift. She asserted that she had been subjected to grooming and desired to divorce Liam and return to her parents. Her parents subsequently became involved, declaring their intention to pursue legal action against him. Jonathan indicated that while her parents' case possessed tenuous legal footing, it was sufficient to greatly alarm the family. As a result, Liam paid a substantial sum of money to Samantha and her family to ensure their silence and prevent any charges from being filed, effectively rendering him financially destitute. Emily adopted a facade of innocence throughout this ordeal, claiming Samantha had informed her that Liam had provided her with the funds. Everyone is aware this is a fabrication, but they have no one else to rely on. The latest information suggests that my former mother-in-law and father-in-law are planning to downsize, and all will be residing in a single-bedroom apartment until their affairs can be resolved, given Emily's minimum wage employment and Liam's utterly depleted bank account. Jonathan shared that Emily had contacted him, pleading for financial assistance, but he declined to engage with her calls. Since he holds full custody of the children, she was unable to manipulate him into providing money through that avenue. In summation, the entire family exhibits profound codependency and is severely dysfunctional, and I am immensely relieved to have extricated myself from their turmoil when I did, even though I would have preferred never to have been associated with them in any capacity whatsoever. I had hoped Liam would face incarceration for his actions against the unfortunate young woman. He is a manipulator and an offender, and I am certain that if he committed such an act once, he will repeat it. I wish a mechanism existed to place him behind bars, but sharing a one-bedroom dwelling with his parents and sister already constitutes a form of confinement, so he is in for a challenging period. They have not contacted me, and I have blocked them across all possible accounts and devices, so I am optimistic that no further incidents will occur, removing any need for another update. I am weary of their theatrics and yearn for my own tranquility.